Welcome to this month's CCI video update, highlighting the great work of schools and their supportive community partners who are working together to reach the aims of Lilly Endowment's Comprehensive Counseling Initiative. I'm Matt Fleck, and with us today is Jack Hess, Executive Director of Civic Lab. Jack, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
I have known a little bit about your work with Civic Lab. You were instrumental in the very start of the Comprehensive Counseling Initiative. We did some work together. So could you start by just telling us a little bit about the work of Civic Lab and what you do there?
Sure. Civic Lab is a not-for-profit organization. We're an institute, and we're really dedicated to advancing the field and practice of community collaboration. So we work with communities all over the country, and we basically help them address really complex problems by rewiring and changing the way they work together.
I know when I see people who are doing work through Civic Lab, a lot of times there's lots of diagrams and there's some really good processes that you use when you're working with schools especially. Do you work in all realms of what the Comprehensive Counseling Initiative looks at? There's a social emotional component, there's a college and career readiness component, and then there's a kind of an academic success component. Is there one of those areas that is a little bit more tied to your work at Civic Lab?
For our particular partnerships, the social emotional learning, particularly mental health, tends to be the topic. And you're right, those are pretty complex systems. So one of our core principles is if it remains invisible, it remains unsolvable. So most of our work is trying to take these complex systems and try to make them visible, tangible, and concrete so people can kind of see them and feel them in terms of their connections and their relationships.
Can you give us an example of a school you're working with or school district and kind of what you're working on with them?
Probably our best is just our own, the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation with their Counseling Counts initiative. That was a systems-based community approach where we really set goals at the community level, not just the school level, to really see if we could radically change the stigma around mental health, but also put a comprehensive process in place so there was a seamless kind of connection between the community and the schools to best serve students.
You've been in that realm of connecting communities and people in those communities for a long time. Are schools just a natural component of that, or have you really kind of focused on the school side of it since you started?
Civic Lab kind of grew out of the Community Education Coalition in Columbus, Indiana, and we're still a part of that. That was very purposeful. We don't consider ourselves to be experts. We certainly don't consider ourselves to be consultants. We consider ourselves to be practitioners. And so the Education Coalition has always been from birth to career in terms of its scope. And so these were just natural goals, I think, and just a natural extension of our work.
I think communities find out that work is harder than maybe what they expect sometimes. Do you have any words of wisdom to give to our viewers up from other schools? What maybe works and what doesn't, or things to avoid or things to do, perhaps?
The process is the product. There's no doubt about that. If you're really going to work at the community level, you will probably most likely have the education sector, but the public, the private, and the social sector there as well. And don't need to tell you, but all three of those sectors speak a very different language. They have very different goals. They measure things in very different ways. And they have very different time frames and timetables they work on. So part of it is trying to get everyone aligned to one common approach or one common process that they co-design from the very beginning. So everyone kind of knows what the expectations are, what the roles are, and what the time frames are going to be in kind of achieving the work together. So you take a lot of different languages and try to condense it down to one language and one process, even though back at home at the ranch, each sector kind of has their own process they work. So in our experience, if you can get everyone aligned around that singular process, it helps to align the outcomes and the expectations across these sectors, right?
I know the go-getters are like, let's get going on this, but you really almost have to establish that foundation, that, like you said, that structure before you can really make change.
Indeed. Yeah, there are a lot of people, we joke, try to go around our process kind of backward, where you start with what do we want to do, and then, figure it out from there. But ours is very much a process of shared learning among the group and then co-creation of all strategies. It takes a little more time on the onset But the overall kind of time in terms of achieving outcomes is pretty much the same, because you don't have to sell anyone afterward about kind of what the group has kind of come to consensus on solutions, because the group created the solutions themselves.
Yeah, so exactly. I would assume that you are considered maybe a backbone organization. Do you recommend schools, when they try to look at change or try to maybe make deeper change, that they have some sort of an organization like yours to help them out?
It certainly helps. We colloquially always just said, if you don't staff it, it won't happen. I think we said that long before backbone organizations kind of became part of the vernacular with collective impact. But absolutely. I mean, it really pays to have those that can facilitate the process and can hold the project management pieces that come with this kind of large-scale collaborative work, always come along as part of the work. And so you really need dedicated individuals who can think about process, where you're at and where you're going, but also kind of manage some of those really intricate project details in between meetings and points of collaboration.
We have had some schools that are formed collaboratives through the Comprehensive Counseling Initiative, so that and I think several of them found out that they really had to find a structure and a process, but because they're working with many schools. And once they found that, or once they found what worked with that group particularly, they felt like they were making great progress. It's good to know.
Indeed. Yeah, I think that, context is everything kind of in this game, really. And so each collaborative kind of has to form in its own way, based upon the relationships and the strengths and the assets within a given community. And if you allow it to emerge from that authenticness of the community, you've probably done it right, as opposed to maybe even borrowing something. Sometimes we call that synthetic wholeness, where you borrowed a model and then you try to fit it into community. So those who usually do a homegrown approach usually are much happier with the overall outcomes and the overall nature of the collaborative they've created.
So I'm thinking of schools, and they say, this is a great idea, we need to do this. First of all, what would be the next step for them? And are there other organizations like Civic Lab that can do this type of work?
Indeed, there are many. I think the biggest piece of advice is, don't be afraid to look outside of the education system or outside the education sphere. A lot of what we do, and a lot of others like us, we just bring kind of practice and I think solutions from other industries, such as business.
Mm-hmm.
Business does some things that are very well, especially around, project management, process design, learner journey or experience mapping, which are really useful to experiences around students. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of applicability from the mindset of continuous quality and all those. There's a lot of great tools and a lot of things that can be learned. Many times businesses are just waiting to be asked, to contribute such approaches and things they do daily, and they do so well. So I think that's always our biggest advice. Don't be afraid to ask, and make sure, you kind of give yourself the courage to go out and look beyond the education sector for really things that can help in the improvement space.
So just asking this as a last sort of question, Jack, are there any suggestions you have for resources or materials that schools could use to perhaps convince their administrators or their community action groups that this is kind of a good process to start to think about the process before they jump in to start doing some of this work?
There's a lot of backbone organizations that come together in an association, and there are a number of those, but I think some of the more prominent ones specific to education, the Collective Impact Forum online is a great comprehensive national organization of backbone organizations, most of which specialize in education, but they are grouped by the social problem that they work on and address, so you can go right to education. Strive Together is a fantastic national network of nearly 60 communities who do work in the education space, what they call cradle to career. They produce tremendous resources. They produce reports. So especially if you're looking to kind of build the case for working in such a way and to see that there's indeed measurable outcomes that can come from such approaches, I think those are two great starting points to really see and really just get a good survey of the landscape of what's going on in collaborative work across the country.
Jack, I wish we had more time. This is really, really helpful. I hope as much for schools as it is for me, just to kind of get the broader perspective of how change happens and how schools can be a part of the process of making that change happen in a positive way. I know you're doing great work and you're always busy. So thanks for taking the time to do this, Jack. It's good getting back in touch with you.
Good to be in touch with you. We so appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.